Welcome to the Tying Toolbox from BlueLineCo. Today we are talking about bucktail. So, bucktails are one of the most finicky natural materials, personally, for me. I spend a lot of money on bucktails to get good ones. There's a couple different qualities of bucktail. I personally like to go with one that's a very high quality because I end up liking a lot more of the fibers, and you can also see this is a lot larger than some other bucktails could be. So you end up getting a little more bang for your buck, even though they are more expensive at the front end. But I really like a really good bucktail. You can do a lot with it. It doesn't have a ton of use in dry flies or a little bit of use in nymphs, not a ton, but it is a very streamer-specific material, heavily used in streamers and saltwater flies, so I knew we had to talk about it. So, a couple different things that you need to know about the diagram of kind of the different fibers of a bucktail before we get going. So as a full bucktail goes, it kind of goes from stiffer fibers to more hollow and less stiff, a little more flexible fibers down here at the bottom. These bottom fibers are a little better for doing a reverse stack or a spin, which we're going to talk about here in a minute. The top fibers are a little better for a body or tying in as a tail. These will not tend to kink as bad as the ones at the bottom. So you will notice that I have stepped up to the more streamer bobbin, has a little wider arms, and it has a larger bobbin barrel here for the thread. That lets me get a little more tension and a little more oomph when I pull down on this. We'll see, we'll have to add not a ton of pressure, but we will definitely be adding more pressure than what we have been doing to this bucktail to get it to kind of act the way we want. I'm going to be cutting this bucktail with my rough scissors. Anything that you're making cuts off of a hide with, whether it's bucktail or deer hair, anything like that, this stuff actually can, over time, will wear down a pair of scissors. So make sure that when you're doing rough cuts, you're using your all-purpose scissors and not your arrow point scissors. So the first way that you can use bucktail is as a tail of a fly. It's really great because it has a lot of movement, but it really doesn't soak up much water. Similar to the synthetic that we talked about in the last episode from Flashabou's, but it is a natural material, which some folks just like tying with naturals more than a synthetic. So for a tail like this, or if we're going to make a body for like a Clouser minnow, we're going to pick some higher strands. We don't want them to kind of kink and spread out as much. So we're going to pick from halfway up. So I'm going to go in with my rough pair of scissors, cut out a piece of hair that's right around, I would say, about a pencil size. Now, one thing we also need to do when we're prepping this bucktail is kind of grab the fronts of the tips and pull the excess butts out. The bucktail is naturally tapered, which you can't get in most synthetic materials, won't have very much of a taper. But these naturally tapered bucktails are super cool because you don't have to trim them yourself. They automatically, as you cut them, will taper down. But I still like to pull out some of these short fibers from the butts of the deer hair. First step in tying in a bucktail is, again, just to figure out how long you need it. So this is a relatively larger hook, so we're probably going to add right around a length and a half of the shank. So first wrap that you're going to do is going to be pretty loose. We're just going to make sure we get a loose wrap and kind of start working that a little ways to spread out around the hook. Another couple loose thread wraps to kind of help lock it in. Then we're going to apply quite a bit of tension to that bobbin to start locking this thread down. Now remember, we're going to start wrapping forwards, as those wraps right on top of each other don't do a lot to hold in this bucktail. We need to wrap it down. So we're going to start working forwards. I like to even hold the front of those butt sections down and just get a couple extra thread wraps on top of it. This can help you build bulk as well underneath a fly. Then we would take our rough scissors and come in here and trim it out. finish off by tying down the butts, and even can come back over it. But that's how I would start out with using bucktail, is just get used to tying in as a tail on a few different flies. I really like this. It's a simple yet very effective pattern for just tying in some tails. Add some different types of flash or some wraps, maybe some marabou up here, and a head, and you're done. As I mentioned earlier, a Clouser minnow would be one of the first flies that I would learn to tie if I was interested in streamer fishing. We would use the exact same technique that I just used, except we would do that off the back and then again off the front here. The next thing I was going to teach you guys for bucktail is how to do a reverse tie. Now this is a much more advanced technique here. This is not something that you would do probably very early on in your tying career, but I want to let you know there is not a great substitute for bucktail for doing a reverse tie. I really enjoy using this method. Some of the Blue Line flies do have reverse tied bucktail in them. It's a great method for adding bulk to a fly and a lot of movement. To do anything reverse tie, we're kind of going to start right around the halfway mark or down on the bucktails. We want those kind of softer, more hollow fibers. Obviously, I'm tying in a white bucktail. Here, I would be using white thread. Normally, I am using black just so that you can see it, have a little better contrast for it. Also, one of the things for tying in a reverse tie is you really want to make sure you've got some very strong thread. There's a couple different threads out there that are very strong. I recommend something that's GSP or gel spun. There's a few different brands. Pick whichever one you like, but I highly recommend having a very strong thread for this. So instead of tying it in rearwards like we did last time, we're actually going to tie it in forwards. This could be a little harder to measure out, because you kind of have to over-exaggerate to account for the fold in it. But we're going to kind of get that measured out as we can here. Transfer to our left hand to hold it. We're going to tie in, get a loose thread wrap over the top, a couple loose ones. Make sure that your fibers go all the way around the hook. And now watch as I kind of start applying tension to this, you'll see that bucktail start to kind of splay out. We're just going to start getting a couple of tight thread wraps there. Working rearwards. So we're just going to kind of keep covering up the butts of these this bucktail as we wrap rearwards. See how we have a little piece of thread in there, almost a little dam that we've built up? We want that. Next, I'm going to come in here with my scissors, and some of this you may not even want to do, just depending upon the fly, but I'm going to come in and trim out some of these butts so that they're not as long. Sometimes you might want to trim them all the way down if you're not wanting to add a ton of bulk. Sometimes you might want to be adding bulk, so you're going to leave some of the leave these butt sections a little longer. So now that we've got our butt sections kind of trimmed down, again, remember, you're not really going to see these, so they definitely don't have to be nice and crisp and aligned, but you can kind of determine how much you want to cut based on how much bulk you want to add. So remember, we started wrapping up towards the front of this, and we wrapped rearwards. So we're going to start pushing these fibers rearwards, and that's going to give ourselves a little bit of a thread dam for that for the bucktail to grab. So when we get here, we want to spin our thread to the right. That makes your thread more skinny and narrow, gives it a little more of a spiral shape, and it will help it grab material a little bit better. So from here, we're going to get, again, just a loose thread wrap right around the front, and gently, slowly start applying pressure. Now get a couple more once you've got that pressure applied. Now you can work forward with it and on to your next thing. So that's a really awesome way to add a lot of bulk to a fly without adding a lot of material. So you can see here, if you were to do this as, say, have a tail behind it, say you had a collar, you could put some marabou in front of this or some type of brush, whatever you wanted to kind of get it to stand up and give your fly a little bit of structure. But because this stuff is pretty loose and flexy, as you pull it through the water, this stuff is really going to push backwards. And then as you pause the fly, it's going to pop back out. So it gives your fly a lot of breathing movement in the water, a really cool swimming movement. A reverse tie bucktail is really, really hard to beat for me. So hopefully you guys feel a little more comfortable after watching this with working with bucktail. Again, if your bucktail is not acting properly, likely you do not have a very quality bucktail. If it's hard to find bucktail, hop online, reach out to your local fly shops. It can be difficult to find good bucktails. It is something that is hard to search for. Generally, if I'm in a store and I find good bucktail, I tend to buy a lot of it. I don't just buy one tail. I tend to buy them out of tails if I'm in a shop that's got good bucktails. But thanks so much for watching. Join us for the next episode. Is one of my favorites. It's about synthetic fibers. So we're going to be talking about some synthetic alternatives to bucktails, like EP fibers, and some different types of flash, and also how to build a brush with a synthetic material. So stay tuned. Remember to like and subscribe. We'll see you in the next episode.
Bingo.
Bingo, bango.